Hi, I'm Jane, and I'm one of the engineers here at Meta. Today, we're going to do a quick run-through of system design and product architecture interviews to help you decide which type of interview is the best fit for your skill set. The design interviews are designed to assess your ability to build a software solution to an ambiguous real-world problem. These tend to encompass a large problem space with no single correct solution. The key thing your interviewer will be focused on are evaluating problem navigation, solution design, technical excellence, and technical communication. On problem navigation, your interviewer wants to see your ability to organize the problem space, the constraints, and the potential solution. They also want to see you systematically reduce ambiguity, target the most important problems to solve for, and define a requirement set to design to. For solution design, you're expected to design a working, scalable solution, taking into account all of the different user and developer scenarios. For technical excellence, you're expected to dive into technical details when appropriate, articulate multiple options, and assess trade-offs, foresee points of failure, and demonstrate technical knowledge of concepts, techniques, frameworks, and API. Lastly, on technical communication, you're expected to logically communicate your reasoning and articulate your technical ideas, viewpoints, trade-offs, and vision. Focusing on the differences between system design and product architecture, a good rule of thumb is if you can build the entire product using just AWS components, then it's probably a product architecture question. If not, system design is more appropriate. On product architecture, the focus is more on holistic parts of building a software solution, and less focused on the back-end components required. A product architecture question typically has a lot more product-oriented questions to be considered, and more leeway in terms of the direction that the interview question can go in. You'll often be asked a lot more details on the user experience flows and to describe the APIs in detail. On system design, the interview is characterized by a fairly well-defined problem and a focus on the back-end system components and their interactions. There is some ambiguity and product design elements to this question, typically used as extensions once the initial solution has been proposed. But the focus here is normally on the standard parts of building a solution. There's a bit more emphasis on quantitative analysis and using it to focus on scaling the system and understanding the system bottlenecks. You'll also be asked a lot more on the details of schema design. There are many signals you can use to determine which of these two interviews to pick. For the system design interview, here are some questions to ask yourself. Have you ever dealt with individual machines? Have you had to deploy services or debug reliability issues? Do you know how to build AWS services? Would you be able to debug if a specific piece of data center fell off the internet? If you're unsure of any of the above, or if you need help handling a deployment, system design is probably not the best fit for you. For the product architecture interview, here are some questions you can ask. Have you ever built user-facing products before? Do you think about usability, accessibility, and product visibility? Do you think about how your products work in the real world, and how they might deal with abuse and bad actors? Could you design any of the products you regularly use? If you're unsure of any of these, product architecture is probably not a great fit. To typify the difference, designing, building, deploying, and operating a PubSub system within Quora will be a system design question, while building Quora on AWS will be a product architecture one. To illustrate all of these ideas, let's run through a quick example, type-ahead suggestions. You'll probably be asked something like, design a system to power type-ahead suggestions for a site like Google or YouTube. For both formats, you'll be asked to identify the concrete scope of the problem, discuss trade-offs in the decisions you make, and explain any potential to improve the design given what you have covered. In a system design interview, you would focus on the backend components and schema design. For the type-ahead question, you might consider, what is the estimated QPS needed to support a scale of 1 million concurrent users? And how can we design the schema to store type-ahead suggestions such that it can handle the given volume of queries? How will we optimize the system to return the top results of all time? And what about the top results from the past day? Could we instead return a combination of both timeframes? A good candidate will see the opportunity here to not just optimize for a finite set of timeframes, but support a weighted time function. How can we distribute the storage such that the popular words and letters are not heavily queried? And what if this data structure is too large to fit on a single machine? Now, if this was a product architecture interview, you would instead focus on the front-end components and API design. Using that same type of head question, you might think about how to design the API to handle repeated requests. If the product would still work in poor network conditions, how do we guard against spammers or bad actors trying to influence the top suggestions? Does the system support personalization and localization? How can we optimize the request parameters and cache headers to optimally take advantage of browser and ISP caching? What other data can we cache to save on extra requests? Can we store data for the next set of requests for different subsequent character keystrokes? What is the effect on payload size, and is this trade-off worthwhile? Now that you understand the difference between system design and product architecture interviews, here's a few common tricks for succeeding at the one that you pick. Don't be afraid to ask your interviewer for clarification whenever necessary. A lot of the interview is focused on navigating ambiguity. Familiarize yourself with the format of the interview, and focus on deeply understanding parts of the system. For example, if you reference something like Memcache, you might be asked to describe exactly how it works. Note that deeply understanding parts of the system means slightly different things in system design versus product architecture, based on the differences I covered before. Some common pitfalls include only focusing on technical requirements and skipping non-functional requirements, like understanding why we're building this system in the first place, or not being able to provide a working solution by the end of the interview. This often happens if the candidate spends too much time on problem exploration, skips thinking about trade-offs, or misses key pieces of quantitative analysis. In terms of communication, failures tend to be around unstructured focus, like focusing on deep dives without a big picture, or inability to drive the conversation. Lastly, many candidates will have trouble when they're forced to go into the details beyond just the high-level design of the system. To wrap things up, here are a few best practices for you to keep in mind. Write down requirements in a way that the interviewer can see it. That way, they can correct you if there's a misunderstanding. When working on quantitative analysis, try to focus on the sizings that affect what you build. Try not to just follow a template solution from textbooks, as you're expected to make something specific to your problem. Explain your assumptions and choices, and always ensure that your design actually solves the original problem statement. Lastly, focus on designing the system to make it work end-to-end first, before deep diving into the different segments of the problem. I hope this has been helpful, and all the best with your interview.